Thank you, guys. Great to see you guys. Thank you.
Jumpstart team, thank you for putting this on. You guys provide a huge service and return on investment in the state of Ohio. Thank you for doing it. Jumpstart Ventures team, Hardik, thank you for all you're doing. Lauren, I don't know where you are, but you have worked tirelessly. Thank you. Thanks, Lauren. A whole clap for the Jumpstart team, please. I'm going to call out Matt Reel. Matt Reel heads up government affairs and is one of the most skilled people in this business. Brian Dirtle, I don't think is here. Brian is one of the most, just an expert in this realm of government relations. I'm humbled to get to work with those two guys. Lauren makes it easy. Haley, I don't know where you are. You're just one of my favorite, but thank you for all your help. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for being here. It's important to convene. I love these types of events, especially when you have a conversation like this. Conversations, you learn something that you're not usually expected to learn, as opposed to just a speech. It's a little more interactive. So I hope you guys get something out of it. This is all about how do we ignite the innovation hub that is Ohio. It's not Cleveland, it's not Cincinnati, it's not Columbus. It is Ohio, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're lucky to have someone that's been a successful entrepreneur, a successful investor, and hopefully more to come in that career with a laser focus on this part of the economy that gets overlooked sometimes. He is going to bring a spotlight to that. So Vivek, thank you for being here. It's appreciated.
Thank you, Bobby.
A little bit about myself. I'm Bobby Kovey. This is the unimportant part. Feel free to check emails and text messages. I run a government relations firm called the Credo Company. In my spare time, I sometimes help with this guy's efforts. I also run an energy consulting firm, so if you've noticed your electric bill is going through the roof, I'll buy your first drink at the bar. Is there a reception after this? Okay, well, there you go. They're free. Growing up, I always wanted to be David Letterman or the cleanup hitter for the Indians. Neither one happened. So in the spirit of Letterman, with the top 10 list, we have a series of questions that we want to get through with Vivek. And I hope you guys get something out of it. Vivek is a very personable person. He's going to put his view on this. We're going to talk policy. We're going to talk what works in a metric as it relates to having a capitalistic economy, a startup economy. So please tune in, listen hard. I hope this is going to be a lot of wealth of information for you. How are you?
Good, man. Doing well. Looking forward to this discussion. A little different than the standard, political pit stop.
Yeah, you've been traveling the state nonstop. From your perspective, how's it going?
It's going well. It's going really well. I mean, I'm probably meeting most of you in this room in person this way for the first time, and just to take a couple of minutes before we dive into policy and whatever else we want to discuss, I thought it might just be helpful to share a bit of my background. And it's a background that I think probably crosses paths, at least in my career, with the kinds of things that many of you in the room do. I grew up in Cincinnati. I went to public schools through 8th grade. I went to a school called St. X for high school in Cincinnati, and then went to the East Coast for college. I went to Harvard, studied biology, thought I was going to be a scientist, ended up graduating, joining a biotech investment pod at a hedge fund in New York, where I worked for at least 3 years before going to law school to scratch an itch that I had for a long time. Did that for 3 years at Yale, met my wife, who was in med school there, is the only productive thing actually to probably come out of law school, but it was the most important, and ended up moving back to New York. Had a lot more spare time on my hands when I moved to New York after I kept my hedge fund job while I was in law school, so when I got out of law school, I had more spare time on my hands. Too much spare time, it turned out. I decided to take up a very short-lived and ignominious, in retrospect, career in stand-up comedy. I filled my excess time with that. It didn't go terribly well. Did about 10 shows in New York, but they gave me a tip. And it was a tip that stuck with me and led to my journey in entrepreneurship, which is why I share it with all of you. They say when something really annoys you, really gets under your skin, just write it down as quick as you can. Carry a notebook everywhere you go. And then you go back home and you unpack what was annoying about it. And usually there's a joke at the heart of it. So it didn't work out as well as I had hoped for me in stand-up comedy. But I ended up doing that in my day job as well as an investor in the biotech sector. A bunch of things that irritated me about the way the pharma and biotech industry ran itself. And eventually that notebook ended up comprising my business plan for for launching my first major company, which was Roivant, built to develop drugs that the rest of the pharmaceutical industry had ignored, to hire people not just from within the industry, but from outside of the industry. I thought the tech industry and even the finance industry had done a great job of that. Pharma was very insular in its hiring. And to give people skin in the game in giving them uncapped upside as scientists or drug developers in the projects they actually work on, which they wouldn't have in big pharma. And I founded that company in 2014. The company celebrated its 10-year anniversary last year, and today, about 11 years in, it has delivered 5 FDA-approved medicines, including one that is a life-saving therapy in kids. 100% of those kids are born with a genetic disease where they die by the age of 3, and we developed a therapy where 70% of those kids live lives of normal duration. And the company was on my mind today even. Today it's a $10 billion company on the NASDAQ, but reported very positive data. I read about it this morning as no longer being part of the company, but was very proud that one of the people who was overseeing that project was one of the out-of-pharma industry recruits that we brought in, who's succeeded at a scale and now overseeing the development of medicines when the traditional pharma companies would have never. There's a guy I overlapped with in college and law school, brilliant, never would have been recruited or put in a position of authority at a biotech company. And that's a big part of how I achieved my success, and have founded a number of other companies since then, which we could take the hour to talk about if we went into them. But I bring all of that up because I want to bring that entrepreneurial approach, hopefully, to the leadership of a state. And that's something we haven't historically seen, but we want to make sure, and I'm trying to embody this by example, more people who aren't necessarily careerists in government, just like they aren't careerists in pharma. They aren't careerists in government still stepping up to say we want to serve. And there's many ways to serve, not just through elected office, but to serve our country and our state. And I think we live in a moment in our history where if we have more entrepreneurs, more investors, more business leaders use their talents to help make our state and make our country better, I think that's an untapped opportunity, and that's a big part of what led me to this next step of the journey that I'm on. So with that backdrop, Bobby, happy to go into any of the questions you want to hit.
It leads to something I've heard you say around the state, whether it be in Northwest Ohio, Northeast Ohio, Central Ohio. You say, Ohio's doing good, but we need to step on the gas.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes into my first question. When you were first starting out, you started a company in New York.
Right.
What led you to decide to start that company in New York versus Ohio? How can we step on the gas to make sure that from now on, companies come here?
Sure. Look, I hope my kids, we're raising our kids in Columbus, one's 5, one's 3. We're expecting a daughter early next year. If all goes well, God willing. Thank you. We appreciate that. And our hope is our kids achieve greater things even than a poor one I have. She's a successful throat surgeon at the cancer hospital. I gave you a bit of my entrepreneurial background. Whatever their career path is, business or otherwise, we want them to achieve greater things than we did. But in their case, our hope is by staying right here in Ohio rather than having to seek the best possible opportunities somewhere else. But here's how we're not going to do it. It's not going to be by forcing them. It's by making sure the best possibilities on planet Earth are available right here in our own home state. So there's no silver bullet. That is going to take time to build to, but that's what we aspire to. And at least stating that as a goal is the first step to getting there. Now, I'll give you sort of some pragmatic things we can do over the course of this discussion. Zero capital gains taxation, the most founder-friendly corporate environment for starting new companies. These are all things I want to get done in the first few months in office. But part of it is just reawakening our sense of ambition as a state. For most of our national history, we were that state in America. We were the state that Neil Armstrong was born, raised, living in when he became the first man in human history to walk on the moon. The state that John Glenn was born, raised, living in when he became the first American to make it into orbit around the Earth. The state of the Wright brothers, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, when they eventually took flight at a moment they were taught to believe that was impossible. That's who we were. We had 6 of the top 15 wealthiest cities in America right here in Ohio in 1950, which isn't that long ago, right? Cleveland, where we are today, along with Youngstown, was the steel production capital of the West. Akron, the rubber capital. Toledo, the glass capital. Dayton, the computing power capital. My hometown of Cincinnati was known around the world as the Queen City. And so to those who think that's a ridiculous goal to set, I think we ought to remind ourselves that it wasn't that long ago that Ohio was that state in our country. But I do think that aspiring to be the best in our country rather than just to be the best in our region is the first step to get there. As I'm sure many of you, successful people from many sectors and walks of life in this room, you're never going to achieve a goal unless you at least aim and aspire to get there. Sometimes you might aspire to get there and you may still not get there, but you're definitely not going to get there unless you aspire to it. And I think it's been a while since we as a state in Ohio aspired to lead our country, resigning ourselves to Texas or Florida or in other respects, New York or California. You asked me a first personal question, why did we go to New York? It's because where I felt the best opportunity was. Why did I go to Harvard? I thought I was going to get the best education there. When I graduated, we wanted to go to the place where you were going to be able to recruit the most ambitious people I believe we could on planet Earth to achieve a mission that others would have doubted. And for me, in the domain that I was entering, my first job was there in the financial world. New York was a natural place to do it. But my hope is, and I hope soon my responsibility is, to now make Ohio that place for the next generation. And we left New York. We moved to Ohio for a reason, right? To raise our kids. We don't want to raise our kids in New York. We want to do it right here at home. And so we moved back over a half decade ago. And I consider it both my responsibility as a father, as well as hopefully a leader of this state, to make sure that we're the place where people are flocking.
Right. Founders in the room. Founders, raise your hand. Investors in the room. Investors, raise your hand. Got a good mix of investors and founders. What do you think, talking about tactics to go along with your vision, tactics, what do you think it takes to attract the venture capital, to attract the entrepreneurs, to start here and attract that capital?
So I think the entrepreneurs will follow the influx of capital, for sure. There's one more dimension to that I'll come back to in a second, but the first three priorities should be capital, capital, capital. Capital inflow into our state, okay? The population and demographic issues, that'll solve itself if we actually are a place where capital investment is easily available and accessible to aspiring, ambitious entrepreneurs. How do we do that? One of the easiest things I would like to achieve for our state, and it actually is relatively easy, is to end the taxation of capital gains in our state. I bring that up because if you're an equity owner, as an entrepreneur, you're not necessarily taking an income. Certainly from a startup, you may not be taking a very big income, but your value and your payout is going to come ultimately in the form of equity when you sell your company or take it public or have a stake that you sell to private equity or whoever down the road. If we're the state where you get to do that without an added burden, that's naturally going to make, it's like a bead of honey, right? That's exactly where the entrepreneurs are going to go. In contrast to even states like Washington, which say there's zero income tax, but they still tax your capital gains. The reason I love that is it's also very practical. Our state does not derive very much revenue from capital gains taxation. It's less than 300 million, around 250 million or so per year. So there's almost no revenue offset. It's a no-brainer while still attracting entrepreneurs and capital into the state. I'd like for our state to have the most founder-friendly, director and officer protective incorporation statutes in the country. Delaware has historically been good at that. They're losing their way a little bit. We can step into that void, and we have an opportunity right here in Ohio. And you may ask, why haven't we done this in the past? I don't fault anyone for this. You would not think of doing either of those two things. It just would not occur to you if you've been in politics for your whole life. If you've been an entrepreneur, you realize that those things actually matter. And so I think that what we hope to do, I mean, every person has their strengths and weaknesses, and I'm going to have a lot to learn from people who have been pulling the levers in Ohio's government for a long time, because I don't bring that to the table. But I hope to, with a team of people who bring that Ohio political experience, bring an entrepreneur's perspective, to make some relatively simple, basically no cost, zero cost changes that unlock major opportunity in our state. Then that cycle begets itself. Because part of the job of a governor is not just to, set policy, actually to market your state to the rest of the country. I think we need a little bit of a vibe shift. We're doing well, but if we really want to be the best in the country, if we want to lead the next industrial revolution, we could use a bit of a vibe shift. People thinking of Ohio, the center of the country, as the place they go to start a new enterprise, to invest their capital. You got to be an ambassador to the rest of the country. Imagine for the venture capitalists in the room, you generally want to invest. You may not admit it, but you generally want to invest in a founder who's a CEO who can also market the company. And if it's not the CEO, it better be somebody high up next to that person. Because you can build the best product in the world. Probably one of the best venture questions I ask when I'm looking at consumer products venture pitches is, it sounds like a great widget. How will people in the world know that this thing exists? Which is actually the hardest thing to often conquer. For a state, it's no different. We need a vibe shift where people think of Ohio as the place to actually move into rather than the place to move out of. And I think that's going to be achievable. But I consider that as one of the youngest governors, I think, in our state's history, as somebody who came from an entrepreneurial background. Part of a responsibility of a good leader is to also market your state, to play a convening role. I mean, thanks to Jumpstart, you guys are doing that right here. But getting entrepreneurs, investors, Cleveland Clinic's over there, Case Western's over there, and you got Cincinnati Children's and Nationwide and the James Hospital where my wife works, each doing their own thing. We could de-silo a lot of what's going on in this state too, to figure out how we work together to create the benefits of scale, to use our natural resources like the natural gas underneath our ground to power the AI boom. There is no AI dominance without energy dominance. There's no manufacturing dominance without energy dominance. These aren't separate silos, they're flip sides of the same coin. And so I do think breaking down barriers, breaking down silos, common sense policies to attract capital, and then therefore to attract entrepreneurs to follow is one of our paths to success in the state.
Perfect. I hear you say this a lot. You just did it again, talking about a team, talking about having experts. We're not experts at everything. We need those partners. You mentioned Jumpstart. Jumpstart's able to convene. Jumpstart's also not just a convener, but based on metrics alone, Jumpstart's the state leading institution when it comes to the startup economy. What's your view on private sector partners who help incubate that whole economy?
I think it's vitally important. I mean, the truth of the matter is you need risk takers, both in the form of entrepreneurs and capital investors behind them, to take risks. And not all those projects are going to work out, but it's going to be outlier success that ultimately lifts us up. There was Cover My Meds. It came out of, I think, Jumpstart, right? Great Ohio success story. And what did those successes do? I mean, Matt Scantlin was a very talented, successful entrepreneur, is off to building his next thing right here in Ohio as well. And so we want to hit that flywheel where we hit that critical mass of enough of those successes. And it doesn't take that many successes, but enough of those successes that we become that hub where the private sector's really standing eventually on its own 2 feet. And the government's job is half of it's getting out of the way and half of it's providing the right nudge or the right conditions, ranging from capital gains taxation to our statutory environment, to our regulatory environment, to just the tone from the top to say this is actually something that matters. And that last part's really important, Bobby. I do want to say a word about this because I think we're in the middle of a moment in the United States of America and in the middle of a moment in Ohio about asking the question of what is our attitude towards success? I think we ought to ask that question. Is achieving success in the classroom, in business, financially, is that good? Or is it inherently, all else equal, bad? I think it's a real divide. And I'm not here to talk about politics. I've been told to not talk about, my electoral race or anything, so I'm not going to do that. But I will say there are those who believe the biggest insult you could hurl at somebody is to call them a billionaire or to say that they own a private jet, as I happen to. Is that something to villainize? Or ought we ask the question of how do we actually ensure that more people are able to enjoy the same important things that millionaires and billionaires are actually able to? Do we want to talk about universal basic income or do we want to talk about universal extreme wealth? In an era of AI and quantum computing, we have historic opportunities to lift up the standards of living for everyone, to celebrate success instead of villainizing it, to embrace victory over victimhood. And to me, that's the deeper question, because we can go into the policies, but lurking underneath each of those policy debates is a fundamental difference. And this is not a one political party versus the other thing. It actually really isn't. Believe it or not, I think this debate probably exists in some measure within each of the two major political parties too. The real divide is, do we celebrate success or do we villainize it? Do we reward victimhood or do we reward victory? You see, socialism is becoming more popular in America. I may not like that. I don't like that. But I can't deny it. It's a fact. There was a survey that just came out yesterday. Socialism is more popular in America than it's ever been. And the question a guy like me might want to ask is, how do we combat the popularity of socialism? I think probably the best way to combat the popularity of socialism in America, especially amongst young people, is actually to make everyone a capitalist. I mean, the difference between the wealthy and everybody else is whether or not you own an asset that compounds. I would love nothing more than our state to be the state of ownership, where our young people have skin in the game. They're not spiteful to somebody else's success because they're participating in it with real skin in the game themselves. If you're a parent of kids, right now, one of the things I worry about is our educational achievement crisis. We can talk about top-down programs for entrepreneurship. It doesn't matter if we're cultivating students that are on average 4 years behind the average student in China, which is what it is right now. Our nation's report card came out last year, Ohio included, hitting an all-time low in math and reading performance graduating from the 12th grade. In an era of quantum computing and AI and automation, that is unacceptable in the United States of America. All right? We're accepting and resigning ourselves to decline unless we turn that ship around. And so to anybody who's a parent in the room, who's a patriotic parent who loves your country, you want to know one of the most patriotic things you could do is make sure that by the end of third grade that your kid can read. That's the point in a child's life where they go from learning to read to reading to learn. If they don't make that transition, their odds of succeeding in our economy go down cataclysmically. Make sure they know how to do algebra by the end of 8th grade. It may not be achievable for every kid, but it's achievable for most. Almost all kids actually can get there if we cultivate that attitude. And if you're able to, as a parent, take $10,000 and put it away for your kid as early as you can. Stick it in the S&P 500 if you don't know where to put it. Allow it to compound. Make sure your kid's a millionaire by the age of 50. I'm not saying $10,000 is a sniff or sneeze for most people, but if you were able to do that, you put $10,000 in your kid's bank account, but not your bank account, an equity account for that kid, your kid is going to be a millionaire by the time they hit the age of retirement, likely at least 10 years sooner. That's what being patriotic for your country now means more than ever. And so that's the question right now. Do we believe in capitalism or don't we? And I do. And I want to lead this state in a manner that lifts up everybody in this state, including our workers from our inner cities to our rural communities, where we celebrate success instead of villainizing it. And I think that really, not so much Republican versus Democrat, that's the real divide. And I think it's up to us to choose where we actually fall in that debate. But I'll tell you where I am. And if we want a venture capital boom and we want an entrepreneurship boom, the more we vote with our conscience, with conviction in success and in capitalism and in enterprise and in growth and in prosperity over villainization of those same things, I actually think the rest of it's actually relatively simple if we're committed to that.
With your perspective as an investor, an entrepreneur, 5, 10 years down the road, what do you see Ohio's opportunities as it relates to different market sectors? What should we be focused on?
Well, I like starting with our natural advantages. God has blessed our state with every natural gift we could wish for. We've got great natural gas underneath our ground. We've got a great geographic location. It's very important for manufacturing. You think about where we're sitting right now. We've got 60% of North America's population, not America's population, 60% of our continent's population within a single day's drive of where we're having this discussion at this moment. So the way I look at it, we've got water to our north. I mean, look at the summer tourism opportunities here in Cleveland, which I think we ought to exploit even more. God has blessed our state with those great natural resources. How do we use those natural resources? I want to see an advanced manufacturing boom in this state. You think about our geographic position for distribution, let's use that right here. Manufacturing dominance and energy dominance are two sides of the same coin. We've got AI data centers moving in. That creates more demand on our electric grid than we've ever seen. Could be a good thing if we unleash the energy to actually supply that electric grid. Get the natural gas out from underneath our ground and use it. Be the state that leads the country in nuclear energy generation, especially in an era of small modular nuclear reactors. Eventually, further still, you said 20 years, even in an era of fusion. I want Ohio to lead the way on all those things. Great medical institutions in this state. I alluded to them before. Case Western, Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital, Ohio State, Cincinnati Children's, Nationwide, University of Cincinnati. De-silo a lot of the tech transfer and move away from a concern of whether some professor is going to accidentally make a little bit more than they should to at least ask the question of how do we actually make sure some of these therapies get out at all? That's a culture shift that I think we're going to need. But over the next 20 years, you think about biotech, I think about advanced manufacturing, think about nuclear energy, natural gas-driven innovation in the energy sector, quantum computing, and then I also think about leaning and building on the foundations we already have in agriculture and more traditional manufacturing. That's where I see Ohio's future.
I'm going to challenge you with this one. 2, 3 specific priorities you believe Ohio must focus on so that way we compete, and I hear you talk about this.
Yep.
Not just be the best state in the Midwest, compete nationally, globally. What are those 2 or 3 priorities we need to focus on?
Sure, I'll give you, if it has to be 3, I'll give you 3. I may give you 4, okay? Because the 4th I think is underrated, but it's important. First is reversing our population decline. We've got more American-born Ohioans leaving our state than moving in. But the people leaving are actually our younger, educated workers. The people moving in, we love them, but they're older and they tend to be on government aid. So that doesn't work demographically, economically for our state in the long run. We're 11.8-ish million people and slightly declining. I'd like for us to be 15 million and growing by the time I'm done as my next role. We'll leave it at that.
Any fellow Catholics in the room?
I think having more kids is a good thing. I think we need to increase. Our fertility rate has been obviously declining, but we also need to retain more of those young people in our state. Now, I have some ideas on how to do that. I think hard incentives are actually a good way to do it, and we can go into some specifics, perhaps at another time. That's number 1, population decline reversal. Number 2 is energy abundance. I've said it before, I'll say it again. No manufacturing or AI dominance without energy dominance. We're blessed. We have the resources. Use them. Get the red tape out of the way. We're not a state of red tape. We need to speed up our permitting processes. And I think we have an opportunity to do that. And then number 3 is the educational achievement crisis. I think we have an opportunity to be the state that leads our country out of this educational achievement crisis that we're in. And it's not complicated. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all silver bullet. I favor school choice, but we also have to make sure that our public schools are elevating their standards so they're equipped to compete with the best of their alternatives. And many of you run businesses. Imagine if you ran your business and said that, I don't care how you perform, we're going to pay you just the same. I don't care how well you do your job, we're going to hire you or fire you or promote you just the same. Your business would probably fail. Turns out that's how our public schools are run. And it turns out our public schools are failing. So we're going to have to bring basic models of allowing local school leaders, superintendents, principals, to at least make their own decisions about how they're able to compensate their teachers and their staff according to their own assessments of performance in a way that you would at a business, but we're not doing in our public schools today. So that's number 3. And then number 4, which I would add on, is one of our advantages as Ohio is that we are a state of cities. We don't just have one big city like Georgia with Atlanta, their peer state in size. We're a state of cities from Cleveland to Columbus to Cincinnati to Toledo to Dayton to Youngstown to Akron. It's a great advantage that we have, but we're not fully utilizing those otherwise potentially thriving urban environments because of this issue of rising crime. And it's an uncomfortable issue for many people to talk about. It shouldn't be, because nearly everyone I know would favor lower crime if we had a sensible way to get there. And it turns out that most violent crimes are committed by a really, not like a really small, a really, 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 really small number of people. In Greater Columbus, 80% of the crimes are committed by fewer than 500 people. I bet it's 300 or fewer in Cleveland. If that really tiny number of people were able to be taken off the streets, get either the mental health care they need or the prison time they need, that small number of people, crime would go down by 80% in our cities. And the beauty is you could ask, well, how do you know who those people are? They make it really easy for you. They commit crimes repeatedly. They're repeat offenders. So it's not rocket science, right? But what it does take is conviction of will. And so those things, population decline, energy abundance, educational achievement, and reducing urban crime. If we do that, that isn't about right versus left. That's about right versus wrong. That's about up versus down, and I think we have an opportunity, all of us, to aspire to up rather than down for Ohio. That's what I'm hoping for.
Thanks. Last question.
Sure.
From your entrepreneurial journey, put that hat back on. What's one thing you would want the entrepreneurs in this room to walk away with?
I'd say a few things. I want to think about that. It's trite because it's true, but I'll say it anyway. Be willing to fail. If you weren't willing to fail, you weren't really taking a risk. And if you're not really taking a risk, you're not probably adding something of real lasting value. So I think embracing a comfort, a willingness to fail is a healthy attribute. Now, that's not a substitute for saying, oh, well, failure's fine, so I'm just going to not work as hard or be as intellectually rigorous in testing my idea, but to give it the best possible shot you have, knowing that failure is an option. And that's what made this country great the first time. I mean, we were an Ohio frontier state. People who came here first didn't know what they were going to find. It came out west. We were America's first frontier. And if we embrace that attitude of positive, thoughtful risk-taking, calculated risks, I think it's going to be good for our country. I think it's going to be good for our state, and I think it's going to be good for you as an entrepreneur. I think the other thing I would say is make sure you surround yourself with people who question you and you actually embrace that. That's a great favor you can do for yourself. You need people who can disagree but commit, who are aligned with your vision. But surround yourself, whether it's on your management team or your board, with people who you really trust to be able to push you to the outer edges of your thinking through actual open debate, through actual respectful dialogue and challenging you. That's often the best thing you could do. That's the hardest thing when you compose a team. But if you embrace those two things, a commitment to taking calculated, thoughtful risks and surrounding yourself with people who will challenge you in ways that make you uncomfortable, I think those are two ingredients for success that I'd certainly be willing to bet on. So thank you, Bobby, for having me, all right? Thank you guys for having me as well. Good discussion. We'll be back. Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you.